This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. What happened today did not explode. It pressed quietly, deliberately. Inside a room built to enforce order, something fundamental was tested. Not emotion, not patience. Authority, there was no chaos at first. No shouting. Just a pause where rules were supposed to work automatically and didn't. That pause matters more than the outcome. Because systems don't fail loudly. They fail when compliance becomes optional. When enforcement must be proven instead of assumed. You were not meant to notice this moment. It wasn't designed for headlines. It was designed to see how far a boundary could be pushed before it pushed back. And here's the unsettling part. The system hesitated, not long, but long enough. If you're still watching, good. Because what follows isn't about what happened in that room. It's about why it was allowed to reach that point at all. And once you see that, you can't unsee what comes next. What actually controls this system now is not law on paper. It's leverage, attention. And the cost of enforcement. Institutions used to rely on something simple, automatic compliance. You didn't need force because authority was assumed. That assumption is gone. Today, power doesn't come from the rule itself. It comes from how disruptive it is to enforce it. From how expensive it becomes to say no, from how much spectacle enforcement creates. When a system hesitates, even briefly, it teaches a lesson, not to the public, to the next person watching closely. Because if authority must be asserted out loud, then it can be tested. If it can be tested, it can be gamed. And if it can be gamed, it stops being a rule and starts being a negotiation. This is the shift most people miss. The center of gravity moved from compliance to confrontation management. And once a system is forced to manage defiance, instead of preventing it, every interaction becomes riskier than the last. Which brings us to how this didn't happen suddenly at all. This didn't begin with open defiance. That's never how systems break. It began with tolerance, small allowances, minor exceptions that felt reasonable at the time, before authority functioned quietly. Rules were followed without being restated. Boundaries held without being tested. Now, authority narrates itself. Warnings are repeated. Consequences are announced in advance. Compliance is negotiated in public. That change didn't trigger alarms. It was framed as patience, as restraint, as professionalism, but slow shifts are the most dangerous ones because they train everyone involved. They teach the system to absorb pressure. And they teach challengers where the soft spots are. Every unpunished disruption becomes data. Every delayed response becomes precedent, not written, observed. And once behavior is optimized around delay, the system is no longer in control of the timeline. That's when moments stop being isolated. They start stacking, and eventually one of them lands inside a room where delay is no longer an option. Then the system hit a wall, not a collapse, a shock, a single moment where procedure stopped working on its own, where a rule had to be spoken aloud, then repeated. What should have been routine became confrontational, not because of chaos, because of refusal. You could feel the recalculation in real time, not panic. Assessment. How far does this go? How public does enforcement become? How visible does authority need to be before it holds? This wasn't the story. It was the symptom, a pressure spike revealing what had already weakened, because the danger isn't the defiance itself. It's what the system must risk in order to contain it. And for a brief stretch of time, the answer was unclear. If you're still here, pay attention, because moments like this don't end when they're diffused. They echo, and the echo is already shaping what happens next. Here's the mechanism most coverage never touches. Enforcement is no longer binary. It's strategic. The system calculates not justice versus injustice, but stability versus escalation. Every response now carries a cost. Act too fast, and you appear reckless. Wait too long, and you appear weak. So authority becomes conditional, applied carefully, incrementally, with an eye on optics instead of outcomes. And someone benefits from that hesitation. The challenger absorbs none of the institutional risk. They provoke, they stall, they force the system to move first. The damage doesn't land on them immediately. It lands on the process, on credibility, on the expectation that rules enforce themselves. This is how pressure asymmetry works. One side creates disruption cheaply, the other pays to contain it. And once that imbalance is visible, it invites repetition, which is why the next moment didn't calm anything. It accelerated it. Things sped up, not loudly, rapidly. Signals crossed, warnings stacked, time compressed. What had been tolerated minutes earlier now demanded response. There was no room left for ambiguity, no space for informal correction. Authority had to choose between acting or being rewritten, every second stretched. Because once enforcement becomes visible, it stops being symbolic. It becomes precedent. You could feel the pivot from patience to consequence, from assumption to command. And in that narrowing space, everyone understood the same thing at once. This was no longer about behavior. It was about control of the process itself. Because if this moment slipped, everything after it would slip faster. And that's when the system showed its teeth. Not fully, just enough, leaving one question unanswered. What happens the next time? This is where it reaches you. Not abstractly, not politically, personally. Because when authority has to announce itself, it changes how you experience the system. You wait longer. You hear more warnings. You watch rules being debated instead of applied. You start to wonder which rules matter and which ones are suggestions. That uncertainty is the cost. And you pay it quietly in moments when order should be automatic, in places where compliance used to be assumed, in systems that now hesitate before acting. You're told this is restraint, that it's responsible, that it prevents escalation. But what it really does is normalize the idea that pressure works. If you're still watching, stay with me. Because this isn't about one confrontation. It's about what happens after people learn exactly how far the system can be pushed. And once that knowledge spreads, it doesn't stay contained. This doesn't stay local. It never does, because systems watch each other. Institutions learn across borders, across sectors, across power structures. When enforcement hesitates in one place, it's noted elsewhere. Not by the public, by actors who operate near the edge. They see how authority behaves under pressure, how long it waits, what it's willing to risk to avoid escalation, and they adjust. Rules begin to look conditional. Compliance becomes situational. Defiance becomes a tactic instead of a breach. This is how stress propagates, quietly, laterally, not as collapse, but as imitation. And once multiple systems start managing defiance, instead of preventing it, the margin for error disappears, which brings us to the point we're approaching now, where the next response matters more than the last one. From here, there are only three paths. The first is adjustment. The system tightens. Enforcement becomes faster. Boundaries are clarified and held earlier, quieter, more consistently. Authority stops narrating itself and starts acting before pressure accumulates. This path preserves stability, but it requires discipline, and it requires accepting short-term confrontation to avoid long-term erosion. The second path is erosion, the most familiar one. Rules remain intact on paper, while exceptions multiply in practice. Authority continues to hesitate. Each incident is treated as unique. Each response calibrated just enough to get through the day. Nothing breaks all at once, but nothing fully holds either. Then there is rupture, the path no one plans for, where defiance meets delayed enforcement and the correction comes too late, too publicly, too forcefully. At that point, authority doesn't restore order. It shocks the system. Which path we're on isn't clear yet, because the choice hasn't fully been made. There's no clean ending here. That's the point. Because systems don't announce when they're done being tested. They just accumulate pressure until the cost of acting is lower than the cost of waiting. What you witnessed wasn't resolution. It was calibration, a signal sant, a line briefly held, but signals fade. And lines have to be held again. And again, if you're looking for reassurance, this isn't it. The danger isn't that authority failed. It's that it had to prove itself at all. That's not something you fix once. It's something you either reverse early or live with permanently. So keep watching what happens next. Not the personalities, not the spectacle. Watch how quickly rules are enforced. Watch whether consequences arrive quietly or only after defiance becomes unavoidable. Because the next test won't look dramatic at first. It never does. And by the time it does, it's already too late. If you want to understand the next one before it happens, stay with me. This isn't over.